So Bugamijirai le Kesh na January Fui Boon Urdu Trukashe. Moving on to leaders' questions under Standing Order 36.
Gurmaiga de Yaskin Corlia agus Banachting the Philibri Jartain agus an Fubble Moor na Heron. Tanisha in Yearish were Hanikmid and culture of beyond the RTE Fuin Shure and Urge Durahar RTE agus Fuin Realtas in Yehila agus Tamunin Kalte again Fubble in RTE. Tasha Salyar Garibian Tamanish Jeru Harlish and Katniss Televish a Horu Yenu RTE agus Air Horn a Hor or one Muinu in Winnie. Tanisha, yesterday we were all given another glimpse, if we needed another one, of the culture that prevailed at RTE under the former Director General and under successive governments. The report by McCann Fitzgerald has found that 10 redundancies under the 2017 voluntary exit programme did not satisfy the requirements of a redundancy within the meaning of the Redundancy Payment Acts, and that, as a result, it may be the case that RTE should have applied a tax exemption, should not have applied the tax exemption on the €223,000 it made in exit payments to 10 individuals. We also learned that the exit package of RTE's former Chief Financial Officer was not approved by RTE's Executive Board, revelations that I have called on the Revenue Commissioners to investigate in full. And it was only last week, Taoiseach, since the last report in relation to this fiasco around Toy Story the musical, something which was also not approved by the Executive Board. These are damning findings, Taoiseach, and the public are absolutely sick to the teeth of all of this. And it's little wonder that payments of the TV licence have fallen off a cliff. It is vital that the public trust RTE, but trust takes time to build and it needs to be earned. People are sick of the squandering of public money, sick of the lack of accountability, with no one held to account. And it seems the only people who are being held to account are the 60 people that are being brought before the courts every day for non-payment of the TV licence. And what a contrast, Taoiseach. One rule for RTE executives and another rule for the taxpayers. Public service broadcasting is essential, and it needs to be funded properly. It needs to be independent, rigorous and trusted. And that is why the current situation is untenable. It is allowing a very bad situation to deteriorate. And Taoiseach, your government needs to stop dithering and the need to act. You have had a report now on your desk since 2021, 3 years now, with recommendations to abolish the licence fee and to replace that revenue with Exchequer finance. I want you to act on that recommendation. Government bickering and indecision is making a bad decision worse. The public wants decisive action on this, Taoiseach, and they want that action now. Sinn Féin, for our part, would abolish the TV licence and instead fund RTE and other public service media through Exchequer funding. This is in line, this is what was recommended by the expert group on the Future of Media Commission report that was sent to you in July of 2021. Such an approach would end the farcical and often cruel pursuit of hard-pressed individuals through the courts for non-payment, sometimes resulting in their imprisonment for a couple of hours. So removal of the licence fee and a move to replace that with direct Exchequer funding would put RTE on a sustainable financial footing. It would allow for rigorous financial oversight by the Controller and Auditor General, and it would ensure financial scandals that we've seen in RTE are a thing of the past, never to be tolerated and never to happen again. So none of this, and I know that you have suggested that this would impact on RTE's editorial independence, but none of this will, because the Commission's report is very clear and they make recommendations in relation to that and how multi-annual funding would be provided. But let's just remember, nobody suggests that TG Cahir has been interfered with. TG Cahir is Exchequer funding, it is not funded by the licence fee, and there is no suggestion that its editorial independence is in any way jeopardised as a result of that. So I'm asking you, Taoiseach, to stop dithering, to stop delaying, to make a decision, to scrap the licence fee, to replace that financing with Exchequer funding and fulfil the recommendations of the Commission's report.
Well, I do spoil a lot of the Gachenia, agus go magad aska helikas on ride hook doing Riztasach the question. And could I just take an opportunity to wish Charlie O'Leary, who's celebrating his 100th birthday, the very best. He was an iconic figure in the Jack Charlton Irish football team setup. back in the heydays, and his contribution to Irish soccer has been immense, and I think we all thank him for that. Could I say that at the outset I would share the Deputy's dismay at the unfolding events within RTE and the clear absence of proper governance in respect of a whole range of issues which have been well articulated now by various reports and indeed in this House and before many Oireachtas reports. And the Grant Thornton report is absolutely unacceptable in terms of what it reveals, not the report itself, but what it reveals is unacceptable in terms of the absence of the RTE executive, for example, sanctioning redundancies and redundancies happening where in fact there was no suppression of jobs, and we had the situation with the toy show equally shocking in terms of 2 million loss, which was at that time equivalent to the deficit at the time. I would say that the government shares that annoyance and anger, and I do believe there are further reports coming, and I believe those should be subject to further examination by the relevant Oireachtas committee, particularly our media committee in the Oireachtas, and public accounts will no doubt seek to have further sessions in respect of reports that are to come in terms of report on governance. The situation is concerning. That said, I believe the RTE licence fee should be paid. I don't accept the protestations that it shouldn't be paid. It should be paid. I think public service broadcasting is extremely important, particularly in the world of social media. And I have articulated very genuine concerns about full exchequer funding to media generally, because remember, any new system of funding will not be just for RTE. It will be for all public service content in all media, including local radio and national television. There are two issues with it that I would identify, and they haven't actually been addressed by the Commission, and I spoke to the Commission about it afterwards when the report was published. One is the question of independence, and it's a very legitimate question. Sinn Féin's instincts in terms of media have been fairly well demonstrated by your very serial suing of media in this country. And I'll just take a quotation. The number of legal actions that have been filed by Sinn Féin members points to a coordinated campaign against the media in Ireland, unquote. Those are not my words, but those of a joint letter signed by 15 individuals and international press freedom organisations. And in November 2023, these freedom of expression advocates warned Deputy MacDonald that the spate of defamation cases being taken by Sinn Féin TDs is having a chilling effect on democracy. And the signatories to the letter included the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation. So they are very, many people would feel your behaviour in that respect as a party and a coordinated behaviour is one that is suppressing the media. Now, irrespective of who's in government into the future, it is a legitimate question that it sounds great, we'll pay all the bills, full exchequer funding, but it means that any government into the future has a control over Irish media that I'm clear would not be a healthy one. And even if it was about just the scare or allocation of resources in terms of health coming first, social protection coming first, housing coming first, or whatever, and in the normal estimate cycle where pressures come on for various expenditures, and there are finite resources no matter how well the economy is doing, there is always the potential for any government to put the pressure on, squeeze, reduce the funding, use the leverage with a view to controlling the message. And that's a view that people think that Sinn Féin is at in terms of things.
I never heard you utter a word when your former colleagues in your parliamentary party, Colm Keaveney, for example, who served with you and sued the media and sued a journalist in the Irish Independent when he was in your parliamentary party. What about Frank O'Rourke, who's suing the media? John O'Donoghue, the former Cairn Corlier, suing the media in Kerry. What about former Senator Larry Butler? And that's just me Googling in the last 5 minutes. So don't start this nonsense. Don't start this nonsense, right? Now, the Commission, before there was even a scandal in RTE, the Commission recommended getting rid of the TV licence and replacing it with exchequer funding. The Commission looked at all of this. They looked at how you ensure independence. They talked about multi-annual funding that is actually voted on in relation to the Dáil. They looked at all of these issues. You've decided to dismiss that. You say you want a universal fee applied to every single household, another household charge. The Commission are very clear that that is not the approach that we should be taking. TG Car is not licence fee funded. It is Exchequer funded. Are you suggesting that there is interference with the editorial control in terms of TG Car? The reality is people have lost faith in RTE. People are being summoned before the court at a rate of 60 per day for non-payment of the TV licence. Tánaiste, it is time to implement the Commission's recommendations of 3 years ago. Scrap the TV licence, replace it with Exchequer funding and put in place the multi-annual funding that we need RTE and other public service content media to actually make sure that they can thrive in the future.
Well, again, Deputy, I quoted reputable, independent people who monitor freedom of the press and freedom of the media. And Ireland enjoys one of the highest on the World Index in terms of freedom of the media because of government behaviours. But the bottom line is, from your party leader down, you have been systemic in your legal actions against the media, which is having a chilling effect. And I think that needs to be put on the record when you're advocating a system that, in my view, would potentially have a negative impact on media in Ireland into the future and on its independence and indeed on its freedom. And it's a fair point I am making, and the kind of populist response that you have articulated, and it's pure populism. Abolish all. And by the way, when I mentioned universal to replace the licence fee with a reduced universal fee, 70% were paying the RT, that was advocated by the Oireachtas committees. Successive Oireachtas committees on media advocated that.
Thank you.
Not just my idea. The Oireachtas committee did it. We supported it in opposition. We didn't play the populist card that everything can be paid.
Out of respect to the next speaker, can we please? Thank you. Moving on to the Social Democrats, I shouted Deputy Healy-Rae.
And at the outset, I want to send our sympathies to the families and friends of the young people who died and were injured in the horrific crash in Carlow last night. Such a shocking loss of so many young lives is devastating, and my thoughts are with them today. Tánaiste, I want to start with a quote. The story for people with disabilities continues to worsen year after year. Access to therapies is simply appalling, and respite care and opportunities for work for people with disabilities are very poor. The assessment of needs statutory rules are continuously breached. We also know that the government scrapped the mobility allowance and the motorised transport grant. We've been waiting for the new scheme for 4 years and 7 months, longer than the duration of the First World War. There is no excuse for this inertia and lack of progress. You might recognise those words, Tánaiste, because they were delivered by you in opposition during Leaders' Questions in October 2017. Leo Varadkar was the Taoiseach then too. Maybe you can help me and point to one single thing that has changed in the intervening 6.5 years other than you just entering government. The only thing that comes to mind is it has now been 11 years since those transport schemes were scrapped, or to use your analogy, more than twice the duration of World War I. And still, there's no replacement. Is it any wonder that disabled people and parents of children with disabilities feel not just ignored by successive governments, but actively harmed? Because the consistent failure to provide basic supports isn't just some kind of an inconvenience, it's ruining people's lives. It prohibits early intervention, results in social isolation and increased rates of poverty, and ultimately prevents people from being able to live a full and independent life. Tánaiste, the delivery of disability services by this government can be summarised by one word: failure. The failure starts early, when children are left waiting for assessments and then denied access to essential therapies, and it continues throughout a person's life. when you can't access education, when you're locked out of employment, when you can't get nearly the amount of personal assistance hours you need. The list goes on and on and on. It's infuriating for people to listen to the same broken promises from successive governments for years. When you're in opposition, you made lots of commitments to improve services. What do you have to say about those commitments today? Taoiseach, tens of thousands of people are stuck on waiting lists. In fact, the only thing that disabled people are guaranteed access to in this country is a long waiting list. When is this going to change? My questions are, when will the Children's Disability Network teams be fully staffed? When will a new motorised transport grant be introduced? And when will you ratify the optional protocol of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities?
Could I first of all say, you asked the question what has changed or what has developed. But I'll just take the education area alone in terms of education. There's been very significant development since this government was formed. 7 special schools have now been established, and 5 of those are up and running. And that was something that we focused on very, very quickly in terms of special education, because prior to that there hadn't been the establishment of special schools, 2 in particular in the Cork area and a third underway. And also there's been a very significant increase in respect of special needs assistants working in our schools, over and above what was a very significant scheme, a scheme that I introduced back in 1998. I've had a lifelong interest in special needs education, and I'm very keen that we continue to improve resources. About 20,045 special education teachers will now be available for allocation to schools in 2024. That's 20% compared with 2019-2020 of an increase, when the number was at 16,626. And by the end of this year, there'll be 21,584 special needs assistants available to schools. That's an increase of over 35%. So there has been difference. There has been improvements in some areas of special needs provision. Back in 2019-2020 school year, that number stood at 15,000. So from 15,000 to 21,000 SNAs is a significant degree of progress on that front. And about 51,000 children participated in the summer programme last year, which was an increase of 300% over the 2019 figure, and about 389 new special classes for this year, which gives us about 1,300 new special classes sanctioned over the last 4 years. And there was an agreement for the Section 39 pay funding was reached in October, which had been raised in this particular House. And then in terms of the overall, in terms of the health side of it and disability, 700 million extra has been invested in disability between 2018 and 2023. 5 million hours of home support will be delivered this year in personal assistance and home support services. The Children's Disability Services, about 800 whole-time equivalent posts in the Children's Disability Network teams in recent years has been provided for in additional funding. 350 of those posts have been filled. There are issues around staffing vacancies due to staff movement. Remaining DNT posts are at various stages of recruitment. People on disability allowance, blind pension, invalidity pensions are now €29 better off per week since the government took office. And then we brought a range of cost of living supports for the disability services in the cost of living package. And in respect of the Disabled Drivers and Disabled Passenger Scheme, which provides relief from VRT and VAT on the use of an adapted car, as well as an exemption from motor tax, about 80 million is provided. There is a new scheme being developed. The senior officials group is meeting to bring that to a conclusion.
Taoiseach, I'm going to start with a quote again. There is a very disappointing complacency, almost smugness, in the response to this kind of issue. It's now standard practice and mantra to just itamise what is seen as positives and so on, but not deal with the hard questions that are asked. Again, Taoiseach, they're not my words. That was what you said to the Taoiseach when he fobbed you off back in 2017, just like you just fobbed me off there. So I'll ask you again, can you please just deal with the questions that I've asked you? When will the Children's Disability Network teams be fully staffed? When will a new transport scheme be introduced? And am I to presume that that's a no on the ratification of the optional protocol? People have heard enough broken promises, enough itemisation of things like that. All they want are basic services, services the state has an obligation to provide, services that people have a right to. Is it really too much to ask to be prioritised rather than forgotten for somebody in government, for anybody to act with urgency? You listed off a few things there. Your long-term priority of special education needs has amounted to precisely 0 special schools in Cork South West. You referenced Children's Disability Network teams. Not one of them are fully staffed. Pay parity for Section 39 workers, still not there.
Sorry, again, Deputy, I didn't fob you off.
Will you answer the question, please?
What I did do was challenge the assertions in your contribution that 0 had happened since the government came in. That's what you said in respect to special needs services generally. And I'm entitled to do that when you raise what I would believe to be a misleading presentation of the situation. That is not to say that I do not recognise that serious issues still remain, particularly in terms of access to therapies. I've consistently said that in this House, both in opposition and in government. And will continue to do that until I'm satisfied that there's a sufficiency of therapies available. It hasn't been from the want of political will or funding. The HSE have had a model for quite some time around progressing disability, which I've had issues with and which I believe has been problematic and, in my view, of a nature that has reduced children's access to therapies, whereas I want to increase children's access to therapies, particularly in terms of special schools. I answered your question in relation to CNDTs. I answered your questions in relation to the disability motorised scheme in terms of the work that's underway there, and in terms of the Portugal government is examining that. But the more fundamental issue is to get services and to increase services.
I want to raise the issue of wind farms and the proposals to build wind farms across rural Ireland. And it has come to Galway, where right now, surrounding Tuam, there are 4 proposed wind farms. There are lots of issues with the wind farms themselves, but I suppose what has happened is the turbines themselves have got larger, they've got more, they're higher. And since the time the guidelines were introduced in 2006, at that time the span of the blade was 50 metres, now it's 186 metres. And we still have the same distance from a house for the same type of a turbine. Draft guidelines are in place, but then they don't have to adhere to them. Secondly, if you take places where they're being proposed, such as in Belclare, my own area, it's right beside Knockmah Hill, which has about 120,000, 130,000 people visit it every year and walk that hill and view the surrounding visual amenity that is there out onto Galway Bay. And they will be seeing these turbines facing them. We have the issue of another place, they're going into a bog, peatland. But we cannot even cut the turf there, yet the proposal would be to take out 14,000 cubic metres of bog and put in 140 loads for every one turbine to set it up to keep it structurally sound. We have something called the wake effect, which effectively means that there's wind comes back from the turbine, from the propellers. It actually is part of the whole system, and it actually cools down the Earth's surface so that grass for about 10 miles from a distance from it will not be able to grow as good as it would normally. The other thing that's very worrying is that there's this hexafluoride, sulfur hexafluoride, which is being used in the turbines. The EU Commission plan to ban that substance. And that substance is so lethal that if it goes on fire, no fire brigade can go near it. And if it spills out onto the ground, it will destroy the ground for thousands of years. Now, it's a very small amount, but all you need is one of them to go on fire at any particular time. The EU recognise that this is a serious problem. They are bringing in new regulations, which will come in sometime in between 2026 and 2040. And at the same time, we'll keep using this gas. So I would say that the guidelines are completely out of date since 2006. We have talked about new guidelines coming into being. And the most thing, Taoiseach, and I know you will recognise this, that we have communities who are divided, who are actually up in arms, and they're kept in the dark by the developers as to what is happening. So I think it's something that needs to be looked at. And I would ask, can you not suspend the implementation of these wind farms until we get things right?
Taoiseach to respond.
Look, I appreciate the Deputy raising an important issue. Just more broadly, though, I've often reflected on how society has looked at these issues over the last 50, 100 years. I can recall the big protests about nuclear energy. You remember back in the 70s, yeah, you're dead right, but there was never in the 70s or in the 80s the same level of campaigning around fossil fuels. In fact, I can recall headlines in the 70s and 80s, we've struck oil, you know, as if it was the great panacea, the great sort of achievement and so on like that. Whereas fossil fuels, we now know, have been destroying the planet and have created an existential threat to the very survival of humankind on the planet. Yet there was never the same agitation about that as there is about other aspects of renewables or indeed even nuclear, which arguably my problem with nuclear is the waste. What do you do with it? But arguably now, if you look over a 100-year lifespan, it hasn't been anywhere as damaging as fossil fuels have been. And not just in terms of climate, but in terms of human health, in terms of what we breathe in terms of air quality and so on like that. So I just make that general point. And so the move to renewables in Ireland has been very successful overall and very effective in the big picture in terms of leading to a healthier atmosphere, but also contributing to addressing the climate change existential issue. And I believe it is an existential issue for us as humans. And I think we shouldn't understate that. I think we have over 4.8 gigawatts of onshore wind now, so we're a world leader in levels of installed wind energy capacity per capita, as well as in the integration of variable renewable electricity onto the grid. So significant progress has been made last year on a major programme to accelerate offshore and onshore renewable energy. I think the future is in offshore. And we had the first auction, the Offshore Renewable Electricity Support Scheme in May of last year. A further round of auctions are due later this year. And so we're looking at a phased approach to offshore wind development, and the task force has been established to drive that delivery. And on the onshore, I don't believe we should stall the onshore, but I do see in time the offshore overtaking onshore provision. The guidelines, you're correct, go back to 2006, and the review has been ongoing for quite a number of years now. That I do acknowledge. And they are addressing a number of key aspects: noise, setback distance, shadow flicker, community obligation, community dividend and grid connections. And the aim of the review is to strike that appropriate balance between the concerns of local communities whilst maintaining Ireland's ability to provide investment certainty. And that, by the way, takes in bogland biodiversity and walking areas. There are requirements already in terms of planning commissions around applications for wind farms in such areas.
Thank you. Taoiseach, look, nobody can deny that we need to change away from fossil fuel. We have the opportunity of doing it by using solar on our roofs, which is less obtrusive, which does not affect communities at large. We could have, and I think it was Minister Ryan that described it as a roof revolution, which would meet many of our targets. The offshore energy is another area where we are lagging behind. We have the potential to become the new sheikhs of energy in the world by using the Atlantic, but we're lagging behind in trying to do that. Setting up task forces, grand and all that kind of thing. But in the meantime, I have family members, parents whose children will not look for planning permission or won't get planning permission near these wind farms if they go ahead. We're going to do enormous damage to our communities. And in all of this transition to greener energy, the one thing that when I was in the department we always talked about was the just transition. And if the transition is not just, well, it shouldn't happen. So, Taoiseach, I think there is a huge onus on us all to make sure that whatever innovation or whatever new things come into play, that they're tried and trusted and the communities are not the people who suffer.
I thank the Deputy. I don't disagree with much of what you've said. On the guidelines, the Climate Action Plan of 2024 now sets a revised timeline of Q4 of this year for publication of the final wind guidelines, and the Department is working towards meeting this commitment. It has to align with the new Planning and Development Bill of 2023, which is currently undergoing the Oireachtas legislative process, and also the ongoing, has to align with the ongoing review of the National Planning Framework. So therefore, and that will have to take on board, there will be a draft, go to the public for submissions and so on. The first 6 months of 2023, emissions from electricity fell by 17% because of our renewables. And in recent days, 2/3 of our electricity was provided by renewable sources. So it has been a success, and it has been very effective in terms of transforming the situation. And as I say, I think you're correct in terms of the emphasis of the future will be, I think, in offshore and in solar. But also there will be some onshore. Some are in Borplanall at the moment for the last 2 years awaiting decisions. But I do accept that the scale of the technology has, it's escalated exponentially, and that does have impacts, which I think will limit onshore development.
Minister, our Taoiseach, I'm very glad to get the opportunity to raise a number of concerns that people in Kerry and Killarney have in relation to the massive amount of Ukrainians who have been placed in hotels and guest houses around the country. Over 35% of hotel beds are actually taken up in the town of Killarney alone. Killarney people, and indeed all Kerry people, have worked together for almost 150 years to bring the tourism product to where it is or was today. But as a result of a shortage of beds, there has been a serious reduction in footfall. Many small restaurants, pub, coffee shops, craft shops are struggling. 6 are already closed in Killarney, 4 in Culloden, and more in many other places. I'm asking the government to address this serious situation immediately. In relation to housing, I'm asking for a very serious anomaly to be addressed. If you are a local Killarney or Kerry person seeking to rent a private house, the only help you will get from the state is HAP or RAS, which many house owners won't entertain. But if you are an Ukrainian, the house owner will get €800 per month tax-free. So local Kerry and Irish people having to hope to compete against that. I want the same tax exemption to apply to our own people trying to rent as well. We have no homeless centre now in Killarney. Homeless people have to go to Tralee. I don't have to say who's in it now. I know the law is changing for refugees who arrive here from now on in relation to social welfare payments. But all those who have arrived up until now and get the same social welfare payments as Irish people, we are told they all have got a medical card and all the entitlements that come with having a medical card. Many of our own local people, even those who are sick and ill, won't qualify. I want the same benefits and conditions to be made available to our own Irish people. They should all get the same ophthalmology and dental treatments as well. School transport, for as long as I can remember, to qualify for free school transport, your child had to be more than 2 miles from the nearest primary school. This is not the case for the Ukrainian children. They are all driven by transport to the national schools at no limit on distance. They get free transport. Take the care of Killarney or secondary school students who have been going to Culloden for years. They don't get free school transport. But the Ukrainian children do, and there's 11 on one bus. And there was 13 Killarney children that I asked to be allowed to go on the bus to make up the 24 seats. It is a 24-seater bus. This bus is organised by the Minister for Education. I asked that the local 13 children be taken on this bus, but my request was turned down. I want our own people and children to get the same consideration as anyone else when it comes to school transport.
Yeah. First of all, I would say to the Deputy, in respect of the situation with Ukrainians in this country, first of all, Russia invaded Ukraine savagely, illegally, in my view, immorally, and violated the UN Charter in so doing, bombed towns and cities and civilian infrastructure. And I can recall the scenes at the time when the war started of families packing trains, of fathers and husbands saying goodbye to their loved ones. It's all documented. And it led to the largest displacement of European citizens since World War II. I think up to 12 million people displaced. Now, Irish people welcomed Ukrainians into their country. And these are refugees. The majority were women and children without strong incomes, and were part of a European directive, which Europe as a whole said we will look after Ukrainian people who are fleeing war. So the position that you've adopted is to try and contrast that, I think very unfairly and wrongly, if I may say so, Deputy, with respect, to the normal situation here in terms of entitlements to health services and education services. Refugees fleeing war, I think it's a correct and basic humanitarian response to try and do the best we can to facilitate people who are fleeing war in an obvious situation where apartment blocks were being bombed and so forth. And in terms of the €800, I'm very surprised you've referenced that, because the people, those people who get that volunteered their houses, many weren't actually looking for any €800. And that's a month, by the way. But I think the government felt that there would, over time, be costs attached to it in terms of repairs. In some instances, the Red Cross would say, or the local authority would say, you have to bring the building up to a certain standard, or make sure that the electrics are right, and so on like that. And it was fair to say to people who have made their homes their own homes, houses that they had, or whatever. And in some cases, people have brought people into their own homes. And let them have a roof, or a room, sorry, or an access to the wider house. So that's the context of that €800, and that's not going to be extended beyond its provision for people who said, look, I have a spare property or whatever, I'm going to make it available for people who are fleeing war. And the state said, that's very decent of you to do that. We'll help you in terms of €800. That's the context of that. And to try and sort of say, well, everybody should get it now, I think, on same terms, is not comparing like with like at all. The rent-a-room scheme does exist. We brought that in for anyone out there who could rent a room out to any person seeking accommodation, which is creates significant tax reliefs. And on the school front, we should pay tribute to our schools for the manner in which they've accommodated so many Ukrainian children and integrated them into our system.
Listen, Tánaiste, I have no problem with the Ukrainian people or any people from any other part of the world. And don't any one of you over there or over here behind me say that I have any gripe with any of them. The gripe I have is with you and the government. If you were able to give €800 tax-free to one section of the society, you should be able to do it for the others as well. Because Irish people, Kerry people, can't compete for a private house when the house owner is going to get €800 tax-free. How could that be fair? And in relation to the other things, I've no spite in the world for the Ukrainian people, or no gripe at all to tease out of them. But it's with you. I want the same conditions applied across the board in relation to the medical card, in relation to the school transport. It is happening, and the 13 children that I'm talking about, they wouldn't be left on the bus. They have to wait in Killarney for a half an hour for the rural link bus to come along, and they're drowned wet and perish in the cold of the winter. And you said to me that I shouldn't be raising these things. I make no apology for raising these things on behalf of the people of Kerry or Killarney or any part of the country. And if you can't see it going on in Cork, maybe you can, because we're all over the world, and maybe you have to be. But I can tell you what is happening in Cork, the very same as in Kerry. And all I want for the people of Kerry is fair play. I have no no gripe at all with the Ukrainian people. Or don't anyone here say that I have?
Deputy, we're way over time. Please. Tánaiste.
First of all, I didn't say you had. And secondly, I didn't say you should.
I shouldn't have been raised.
I didn't. Never said it. Go back. No, go back over the banks. No, you want to create a drama and you want to create false assertions that I said you shouldn't. No, because this is a new trope going around that we have no right to raise these issues. I've seen it everywhere. I have never said, and I'd invited you to go back over the blanks, as we say, of this exchange. And I challenge you to go back and find the sentence. No, sorry, no. Deputy, I didn't interrupt you. What I'm trying to say, Deputy, I'm saying you made a false assertion that I said I should not. You said, you will let me reply, please, through the chair. You said that I didn't. I said you shouldn't have raised it. I didn't say that. I did not say that at all.
You did say it.
No, I did. Well, check it. I asked you to go and check it.
No, just, we're not doing this, please. Thank you. Tánaiste, through the chair.
Yeah, and I would simply say, first of all, on the medical card, by the way, for Ukrainians, that's means tested after 9 months of being in the country. There's a rent-a-room scheme for 14,000 tax-free earnings already existing for Kerry people and for everybody. The line about sort of you can't compete with 800 a month doesn't tally with me, because that 800 is not for properties in the rental market. It's for people who decided of their own free will, if they had a spare property, to say, I'm making that available to a Ukrainian family because they're fleeing war. People made that decision out of the generosity in their hearts. I'm not going to second guess the generosity of Irish citizens who did that. And the state feels, let's give them some support. 800 a month is not comparable to any rent anywhere.
Thank you.
So it's a helping hand to those who generously gave of their properties. Sorry.